Composite and Seneferu's procedural pipeline. Before we start with the composite itself, let's see what did we get from the previous lighting process, because this is what we are going to compose in this composite process. When we did the lighting render in the previous session, the system has automatically published all the rendered files to the corresponding render tasks that he generated during the publish of the lighting recipe. So each layer in the lighting has created a render task in the database. If you look at here, let's go for the shots. You will notice that there is a lighting task that was created for each render layer. If the lighting recipe generated multiple render layers, then these multiple render layers will be here. It will be render/bg, render bg/foreground, some stuff like that. So accordingly, these are going to be what we will get in comp as dependencies for our comp task. But our comp task is not going to be ready to start before we decide which layers we should use. Otherwise, the production manager doesn't know if your comp task is ready to start or not. So automatically, the lighting artist who published the lighting recipe for render is automatically assigned as a supervisor for the render tasks, so he can check the render tasks, for example, and see if everything is okay. Let's go to... Notice that the render is having multiple passes, so all of them are published to the same. As you can see here, the mat ID, the cryptomat ID, and the material, and the denoised image, and so on. So that's it. Then we only have one version from each one of them. We'll bypass the artistic approval. I will just proceed with the approval. What is supposed to happen is that, of course, the lighting artist will make a rough comp with these things, or will pass them for reviewing, because the result needs to be approved before we spend time on them in comp. Just in case, it depends on how would you like to proceed actually. So now I should be able to see any composite task that is assigned to me and ready to start. Notice that there are two types of the composite tasks. If you have watched the lighting session, then these two different types are similar to what we have in lighting actually. So the composite template SCN is a composite template that we make for the whole sequence of shots belonging to this scene, and the composite of the shot is just as it is, the composite of the shot. The method we followed in lighting gave us consistent look and feel through all the shots belonging to this scene, and consistent object names, mat ID names, material names, pass names, layer names, and everything is consistent between shot and shot from this sequence. So now we want to take advantage from this by using the same method, by making a composite template for all the shots that where we can configure the color grading nodes and mattes and everything in one composite, then we can switch between shots and find everything else is working as expected. So in the composite task, we will be doing just minor tweaks on per shot basis, but the major thing should be coming ready from here. In that case, we will be able to have consistent look and feel also through the rendered composites, just as what we got from the lighting. So let's get started. The first thing we have to do is, of course, to select Nuke from here, and let's work on this task first because it's easier. This is for scene 1. It has only one shot finished, so let's do this simple comp first to see how things is going on. When I set the task to current, notice that this automatically connected the production manager to the Nuke task control here, and the production manager will find any dependencies needed for running this comp. Actually, I forced this to be ready to start because this is not yet ready and it has to be done first. So I will just ignore that. Notice that we have two plates here. One is the original shot plate and the undistorted version of the plate that was produced out of the tracking solution. Depending on the technique and the workflow you are following, in my case, I followed the technique that I rendered the footage and lighting directly using a lens distortion shader that produces the CG output with the distortion that matches the plate directly, rather than getting them here and distort them to match the undistorted and redistorted them back. So instead, I prefer this technique, so I will ignore the undistorted version of the asset, and I will set my task to in progress, and I will click on load dependencies. Like any other process in Seneferu, the production manager loaded for you everything you need to run your task. So these are the dependencies that is loaded for us here. This is the layer, denoised, and the cryptomat ID and cryptomat material and the shot plate. Okay, so that's it, and you will notice here that the production manager created a node called SHInfo. This one we can use it to switch between the shots. The same like the graph state in Katana, but in this case it will be for the comp. Accordingly, when we do the comp based on this, we will be able to switch between shots. Then we get all our composite updated according to the shot that we selected. So I will make this comp and will publish it to show you the rest of what's going to happen during the publish. Let's say that this is the final comp for the shot. Then now we are ready to publish. Then all what we need to do is to create a write node. Let's stop this. All what we need to do is to make a write node. All what we need is just any name, dot, for example, EXR. And let's say that we want to create another write node for a low-res quick time, whatever that move, then set the the settings for each node. As you noticed, I don't care what is the name of the file or where it's going to go. I just care about the extension, so I can configure the settings here, because Seneferu will take care of anything else. Actually, one of the things that I need to tell you about, that you have here some features like, for example, you can query the version of a layer, you can switch between the versions of a layer, you can query the construction history of a node loaded in the system. Like, for example, here it's telling you that this render pass was generated by lighting recipe version 1 from application Katana, and it's telling you that this lighting recipe was having all these assets, like, for example, the train fluid simulation, which is the train steam, the train animation version 3, shader library, and so on. It's telling you information that it can be helpful if you want to reproduce this frame later, or to troubleshoot something, or to know which version of this tree was when this shot was rendered. Maybe you have a new version and you are not sure which one of them was used to produce this frame. You can refer to things like that using these features. And by the way, also, there is an important thing you need to know, that you will notice that these files by default doesn't have a version. Although, if you query the version, you will find that it's version 1. The system knows that because the nodes, when it's loaded, it's having information from the database that the system can use it to understand which version this was. The reason why this doesn't have a version, because these are the approved layers or the approved versions of the render. If you made something like setting this path to version 1, now it will have a version here. So if I set it to use versionless, there will be no version in the path here. When it's versionless file, every time a new approved version of the renders, it will automatically update your recipe. By default, this will happen in all the processes in production except for the editing and for the composite. Editing and composite will always load the assets with a version. So it's configured to load everything with a version. So when a new version is approved, when a new render pass version is approved, it will not update your comp automatically until you come and do that by yourself. But you will receive, however, on your composite task, you will receive notes telling you that your comp needs revisiting because the render is having a new version, a new approved version. So you will get a notes here telling you that you need to update, for example, the plate to version 3 and this to version 2 and so on. Otherwise, you can configure the comp to be updated automatically when a new version of the render is approved. And by the way, for my personal preferences, I always use versionless. I never go with version numbers, and it's something very easy that you can configure if you go to the processes controls here. Then let's go for comp. You will find the flag here that is using, not this one. This one. When this is checked, use version dependencies. This means that all the dependencies will be loaded for the comp is going to be version files rather than the approved versionless files. If I unchecked that flag there, then when I do load dependencies, everything will come to me as you saw here without a version. You can switch it back to a version by clicking on this button. So anyway, now we are ready to go. Everything is fine. Then we can just click on publish and take a snapshot from this. No files to ingest. As usual, anything is supported on the farm. Seneferu will ask you if you would like to submit it to the farm for processing. In this case, if we said submit to render, then this will submit this recipe to render, and before that you will notice that this is now pointing to the correct location where these are going to be rendered. It's actually a temporary path in the sandbox. Then when it's finished, it will be published automatically to a task that was generated in the background called comp render. Exactly like what happened in lighting. When the lighting recipe is published, it created in the database something called render. The comp is also creating a task called comp render. So if we go here, you will find that the being processed comp is going to be published to the comp render, and you as a compositor will be the supervisor on that render, so you can double check it and see if there is anything wrong before submitting it to supervisors for reviewing. Now if we go to the render farm, you will find the job is rendering, and notice that Seneferu has automatically prioritized your render job according to the production schedule and deliveries. So if there is anybody else running something is processing on the farm, your depends on which one of them is higher priority and needed before the other, then this will be managed in the render farm according to the priorities that the production manager decided during the publish, according to the production plan and the importance of the asset you are publishing. There are also additional things that I didn't mention here. Remember that we used the distorted original plate here, and we rendered our CG elements using NR TDE lens that brings the footage as distorted. I have a visitor in the balcony, I think. So there are distorted, these are distorted, but you have here the tracking information. This is the tracking SCN, or if this shot has a tracking task for itself, that was a tracking task for it, then the tracking task will be there instead, or will be here instead of the tracking SCN. The reason why these here is that when you do load them as dependencies, if these tasks were having lens distortion information published from 3D equalizer, for example, inside the files of this guy here, it doesn't have published for Nuke actually, but if it does, if it was configured to publish tracking information or lens distortion information to Nuke, then this will use the 3D equalizer LDPK to make a distort node in case if you want to use the undistorted plate and composite normal CG elements and distort the final result at the end. You will also notice that there is camera animation here. If you loaded the camera animation, then this is going to, it will load for you the 3D camera that was used to render this shot, also in case if you need this for something like relighting, or there are so many things that you can construct a 3D scene for. Like for example, if there are geometries planned to the shot, then these geometries will come as dependency here, because the production manager will detect them, and also when you include them in the loaded dependency, they will come to you here. For example, if you have a model for this mountain here, then you can use it to as a matte object or whatever to occlude this layer, for example, instead of doing roto as I did for this comp. Just one more thing that you need to know about the write nodes when you create the write nodes. It's the name of the write node. Always keep it as write, don't modify it unless you want to publish two different options. Then you can name these things, like for example you can name this just a moment, and for example you can name this option A, and you can name this option B. Let's assume that it's coming like that. In this case, because I named these render nodes, the render is not going to come as comp render. Instead, my renders will come in comp render / option A, and another comp render task will be called comp render option B. That in this case. So that's it. Then I will proceed with the other example, and we will see how to build a composite template for a sequence of shots rather than working on a particular shot.